Yo, what is up? It is your boy Zether, back at it again with part 2 to What If Midoriya Was Like Syndrome. Now, I know I left it off on a bit of a cliffhanger last time, and I don't exactly want to give too much jibber jabber, so we're just going to go ahead and get into a recap and then get started. Alright, so where we had pretty much left off last time, to pretty much just recap the events, we had basically gone over how Deku was told he was quirkless, how he grew up pretty much creating different inventions, and how All Might ended up crushing his dreams and telling him that he can't become a hero because he's quirkless, and being a lot more rude than he was in canon. Deku never gets one for all, and instead, his hatred for All Might festers up in the last part. And we had pretty much left it off with Deku discovering that All Might was born quirkless as well. And he told somebody who was just like him that he couldn't become a hero. That was it. So, let's go right back into where we had left off. So, after Deku had found that out, he would spend the next couple of hours pretty much just thinking about how he's going to deal with things. And just how he feels about the situation. Deku would begin to contemplate about what he should do to pretty much use as a coping mechanism to pretty much see how he wants to, deal with things. As, we would then have Deku essentially just kind of sleeping it off and just thinking to himself, wow, that's it. He would wake up in the middle of the night as he would then think to himself that, he knows exactly what's going to go down tomorrow. As Deku would just stay up and begin to hatch a plan. As this, none of you guys are actually going to be knowing what's going to happen in the plan, but it's a plan. That's all you need to know. Anyways, this is when we would essentially have Deku pretty much going to UA the next day, as their normal hero studies would go by like normal, and they would proceed to take their final exam, which Deku would ultimately pass with flying colors. And this is when we get to a part where I've been wanting to cover for so long since the first part. Now, this is when they would be announced that they're going to be having their final battles against the teachers, as Deku would be paired up with Bakugo, and Bakugo would start screaming, saying that he doesn't want to be paired with this quirkless loser. As Deku would look towards Bakugo and say, well, it's not exactly a thrill for me to be paired up with you either, Bakugo. As Bakugo would grit his teeth and say, well, let's get this over with. As he would walk on over and grab Deku by his shirt, yanking him. As Deku would just straight give Bakugo a stare, as he would not move anymore, and Bakugo would try to move Deku. As Deku would just give Bakugo a death stare, as he would say, alright, this is how we're going to play things? Alright. Two can play at that game. As this is when we would then have Deku essentially just following Bakugo into a building that they're going to be basically in. As they would go into their combat zone, just like in canon, except this time, when Bakugo is telling him that they're going to fight All Might head on, Deku says, I know I'm going to fight All Might head on. As Bakugo would say, what are you talking about, you quirkless nerd? You can't do anything against the symbol of peace. As Deku would say, oh really? I can't? As Bakugo would say, no, there's nothing a quirkless person like you can do against All Might. He's too powerful, we have to. As Deku would look straight towards Bakugo and say, I have to listen to nothing of what you just said. As he would then dash straight towards Bakugo right in front of him and punch him straight into the gut. As Bakugo would drop to the ground and instantly pass out. And this is when Deku would decide that this is when he's finally going to get to confront All Might for everything. For everything that he's done. Now, this is when All Might would fly on over, and basically All Might would be looking for Deku and Bakugo, so he would be scouring the area, looking around to see where he could find Deku and Bakugo. As Deku would pretty much land in front of All Might, as he would then proceed to crack his neck and his knuckles, as he would say, hey All Might, quick question. As All Might would say, what is it, young Midoriya? Deku would then say, you remember when you told me I couldn't become a hero without a quirk? As All Might would say, yeah, what about it? As Deku would point his 0-point energy beam at him, and he would, pretty much make Deku weightless. I keep stumbling. Sheesh. He would proceed to make All Might pretty much frozen in his place. As this is when we would essentially have Deku pretty much holding All Might there. As he would proceed to tell All Might, am I a hero now, All Might? Am I a hero now? As All Might would look towards, Deku would not be able to say a word or even move. As Deku would say, The one thing that's kept me pushing throughout these last couple months to become stronger, create new inventions, and push me along more has been nothing but my hatred for you. How dare you tell somebody who's quirkless that they can't become a hero just because they don't have a powerful quirk like you? And how dare you crush the dreams of somebody who was born just like you, All Might? Now, All Might, I think as much as you'd like to believe that you were born with this amazing power, I know the truth, All Might. I know you weren't born with this miraculous quirk of yours. I know that this quirk is something that you ended up gaining through unknown means. Now, I don't know how you did it, but All Might, just know that I know exactly what's going on. And how dare you manage to tell somebody like me that they can't become a hero with the fact that you were once quirkless yourself. As All Might would not be able to move, and he would just try to fight his hardest to move and break out of, Deku's hold. As Deku would say, I didn't think somebody like you would ever crush my dreams. It's crazy. You look up to your heroes just to realize that you can't trust anybody. Not even your heroes. You can't trust anybody in this world. Everybody just backstabs, and they will go on to crush people's dreams, and the only way that people will ever acknowledge you is if they deem you as a threat. Now look at me, All Might. Look at me. I'm more powerful than anything that you could have ever done, and I did it without any of your little precious gifts. And you know what, All Might? I'm gonna one day make it so that everybody around the world who doesn't have a quirk, and anybody who does have a quirk, has access to these gadgets of mine. And I'm gonna make it so that everybody across the globe could become a great hero just like me. And once everybody's a hero, no one will be. As All Might would finally break one of his arms out of Deku's control, as Deku would say, oh, and All Might, as he would stare down at All Might, as he would say, I took the liberty to pretty much take your quirk for myself. As All Might's eyes would widen, and Deku would, release All Might from the grasp, as All Might would lunge at Deku, telling him that he has to be stopped before his secret can be revealed. As Deku would then proceed to blitz straight towards All Might, being as powerful as All Might was when he was at 100%, as he would gut punch All Might straight at his weak spot, sending him flying straight through 15 buildings, as All Might would crash straight through every single one of them, as All Might would get up and say, Kid, I'm sorry, as this is when Deku would land on top of All Might's guts, as he would then proceed to crush All Might, as he would tell him, so All Might, am I powerful enough to become a hero now? Do you acknowledge me now? That's all I wanted. All I wanted to hear from you was to tell me that I could become a hero. That could have pushed me the same way that this hatred pushed me. Maybe even more. And maybe, just maybe, I wouldn't have had my dreams crushed that day. From hearing it come from somebody like you would have pushed me to push harder. It would have made me strive towards more potential and greatness. But instead, my hero, my symbol, crushed my dreams in an instant. As All Might would pretty much start picking himself up, beaten and battered, as he would say, I'm sorry. As this is when Deku would say, well, you're gonna have enough time to be sorry in the afterlife. As Deku would proceed to use all of his strength that he could muster, as he would proceed to kick All Might in the head so hard that he fractures sorry about that, excuse me. As he would kick All Might straight at the head, fracturing his skull, sending All Might crashing straight through 20 buildings. As All Might would fall unconscious, and Deku would begin to step on All Might's chest like a madman, simply beginning to laugh, telling All Might that there's nobody here to save him. He crashed the comms, and there's nothing that All Might can do about it. As All Might would proceed to basically start spitting out blood, and Deku would land the final hit, killing All Might. As everybody in Class 1A would have seen what Deku had done, as Deku would have instantly killed All Might, and everybody would proceed to basically blitz over to where Deku was at, as they would proceed to try to see if they could help All Might and restrain Deku, sending him to Tartarus, restraining him or sending him off to prison, as none of them would be able to muster up the strength to basically even rush up at Deku, as soon as any of the heroes would have blitzed over to Deku, he would have essentially frozen them in place, as he would have proceeded to make them bounce off the ground like bouncy balls, and he would have proceeded to pretty much begin to just start damaging them beyond belief. As any of the heroes that were there present in the normal, version of the UA exams would proceed to all be killed. And Deku would then proceed to tell them all that if they're happy now. This is what happens when you tell somebody that they can't become something just because they aren't as great as others. He would begin to go on his monologue, telling them all that they're so lucky to be born with these gifts, these powers, and they see themselves as gods. They see themselves as righteous judgment, but that's not at all what they are. They're just the same as him. They're just the same as everybody else. There's nothing special about them. There's nothing that defines them or makes them better than he is. And for some reason, they think that they can be something greater than they already are. As Deku would pick up Midnight by her skull, as he would proceed to tell her that she's nothing, and that she'll never be anything. As he would proceed to kill the rest of the other heroes, telling them all that they have nothing to fear, that it'll be over soon. As he would proceed to rush towards Midnight, and he would crush her skull, ending her life in an instant. As this is when we would have Deku flee with his rocket boots. As Deku would essentially proceed to, begin to, how do I put this? He would proceed to essentially run off. And this is when Deku would arrive back to where he lives at, as he would proceed to basically begin to ask about, other things such as, how he's going to save face. And basically, how he's going to basically have this, avoided on the media. As he pretty much ended up killing anybody who could have pretty much said anything about it. And this is when we would now have Deku pretty much landing at his house, as he would begin to pretty much grab all of his essentials and leave immediately. He would tell his mother Inko that he's sorry for how things turned out, but his anger overwhelmed him. This hero society is corrupt, and he's gonna save it. He's gonna change things, and he's gonna make it so that everybody can become powerful, just like All Might. Just like these people who view themselves as gods. As Deku would proceed to basically create go into an underground bunker that pretty much has an exit, as the army, no, not the army, but a bunch of police officers, as well as top 10 heroes would arrive at Deku's house, as they would begin to pretty much rush in there, take Inko down, and begin to look for where Izuku's at, as they wouldn't actually be able to find him. And also, if you guys can hear my dog barking in the background, I'm sorry for that, but I can't really do too much about that. She'll eventually be quiet, so it should be fine. Anyways, this is when we would now have basically us cutting over to when Deku is essentially fleeing from the scene, boosting off with nothing but his rocket jets. No, his rocket boots. As he would proceed to basically wander into an alley. And this is when he would see a man with a burnt face and scars all over himself, who had just ended up murdering a bunch of villains in an alleyway. As Deku would walk up to him and ask him why he did that, as he would tell Deku that it's none of his business, and unless he wants to face the same fate, he suggests he gets out of there. As Deku would proceed to look towards him and tell him that no, he doesn't think he will. As right before Deku and Dabi were about to get into a confrontation, Kurogiri would teleport Dabi out of there. And as that happens, Deku would lunge in through the portal, as he would then look towards all of the members of the League of Villains, and he would then proceed to basically freeze them all, as he would ask them what they're doing here, as he would say he thought they were all stopped long ago, as they would tell Deku that they're all under new management. This management being Dabi, as we would just have Dabi sitting there on frozen, as Deku would proceed to walk up to him and tell him, so this is your little leader, right? As he would then proceed to ask them all if there's any other members, as they would proceed to tell Deku that not that they can think of, no. Just pretend y'all didn't hear that. Anyways, as this is when Deku would proceed to essentially just proceed to kill every single last one of them, telling them all that he hopes that they rest in peace. Not really, it was kind of He said it with a lot of sarcasm, I guess you could say. I probably should have pointed that out the first time I said it. Anyways, he would proceed to pretty much slaughter the rest of the League of Villains members, as he would basically walk out of there, as the villain broker would walk inside and his mouth would go wide open, as he would ask why, and how he did this, as Deku would freeze him and take him out as well. And this is when we would then have Deku essentially running around through place to places. This is when he would find a guy who basically has his hairline pushed back all the way, as this would be Redestro. And this is when we would have Deku do something that, he had been working on behind the scenes. He was already working for the League, for the Liberation Army. And he was the one who was mainly supplying them all of their weapons, such as guns and support items that they were basically using to try to take down a couple of villains. Their goals were aligned with each other, and Deku took advantage of it. Now, as soon as he arrived, he would go up to the leaders, he would ask them what their plan is going to be. And he would tell them that in a couple of days, they're going to be landing their attack on the Hero Society, as they're going to be attacking Hosu City. And that's where all of the destruction is going to go down. As Stain would exit from the shadows, as he would proceed to look at Deku and ask him who he is. As Deku would proceed to tell him, who he is and why he's there. As Stain would tell him that he has a very twisted reason, but since their goals are somewhat aligned, and he also took down a couple of heroes, he's basically going to just look the other way. As this is when we would have Deku essentially just talking to the villain Redestro, basically discussing their plans and how they're basically going to have this thing play out. As Redestro would tell them all that in a couple of hours they're going to be attacking. As at this point it would have been a couple of days, and this was the day that everything changes. Now, this is when we would have Deku and the rest of the villains, everybody who you saw in the, if you guys have seen the manga, basically attacking with Deku, such as people with Ice Quirk and the Liberation Army leader being Redestro. He has a quirk which can basically use all of his pent-up stress to pretty much grow larger and stronger, basically giving him a very powerful quirk, as this is when they would attack the Hero Society. And a lot of things would begin to change. They would take down a lot of the pro heroes, and in terms of any of the students, they would end up taking every single one of their members down, basically killing every single person that was in the hero course. As a lot of things would change, actually. We would now have it so that, Deku would proceed to blitz on in there. He would proceed to take out heroes like Endeavor by simply freezing them in place, and the rest of the villains would rush in there and basically land finishing blows on them. As that's essentially how this entire situation would be going about. And this is when we would now have Deku essentially blitzing in there, taking down any and every hero as well as villain left and right. Now, this is when we would have Deku finally land in front of the person who he wanted to spare. That being Nezu, seeing that he actually grew a little close and a little bit of an attachment towards Nezu, seeing that he has a little bit in common with him, as he would ask Nezu to join their side. What have the humans done for him anyways? They don't deserve him on their side. The Liberation Army can help them. As Nezu would decline, and this is when Deku would be forced to wield his hand pointed straight at Nezu and shoot a power beam straight through him. And this is when we would then have the Liberation Army leaving, as they would have ended up taking down a plethora of heroes and pro-hero students, basically wiping out the entirety of UA. After taking down Hosu City, they would have ended up going to UA and basically rampaging through any and all of the heroes that they had there, most of them being, kid heroes in training, or, Class 1A and Class 1B. Mirio, Ituma, what's his name? Sun Eater, as well as Nejire would have put up a great fight, but as soon as Deku arrived, he simply froze them in place and ended them. Deku would then proceed to basically, a couple of days later, be in the Liberation Army, as he would essentially just be talking to Redestro about the plans that are coming up and how they're actually going to be doing things, a little different. And this is when Deku would proceed to look at Redestro, as he would say, there's been a little change of plans, as he would stop Redestro before he can do another thing. And this is when Deku would proceed to move Redestro around the room, as he proceeds to make Redestro crash along the walls from up to down, side to side. He would proceed to make Redestro crash all over the ground, hurting Redestro and breaking a couple of bones in his body, as Redestro would try to use his quirk, but he would simply be unable to. As this is when we would now have Deku basically walking outside as he proceeds to take down the rest of the Liberation Army. And he would go out to the public as he puts his hands behind his head and lays down, as the police officers would handcuff him and they would proceed to interrogate him, asking why he did what he did. As Deku would tell them that he had pretty much been brainwashed, and he would have ended up lying to them, telling them all that the reason that everything that has happened from the day of the exam happened was because the Liberation Army had somebody with a quirk who can brainwash you. And this is when they would proceed to take Deku in and basically have a whole meeting of whether they should hold him accountable. As Deku would essentially be announced that, he shouldn't, because, he creates amazing weapons for the army. And since they're in his debt, they would basically back up, they'd back up Deku in his corner. And Deku would actually be allowed to be free. As this is when we would now have a time skip to after this all events happening, as Deku would have ended up getting his Pro Hero license, and he would have also ended up selling his gadgets throughout the entirety of the world. In this version of events, Syndrome wins. There was never nobody there who could stop him. And this is where we're going to be leaving off the scenario of what if Deku was Syndrome. I hope you guys enjoyed this part, as, it was pretty interesting to make it. See, at first this story was going to go in a little bit of a different direction, where I was essentially going to have Deku pretty much just realizing the error of his ways and forgiving All Might. But then I decided, come on now, Syndrome's a villain, and he's a very twisted one at that. So I figured I would have Deku go through the very darkest path that pretty much leads to, Deku pretty much becoming the greatest hero of Japan. Nobody would really know about the incidents that would have happened before, and this is essentially where we left off. So with that being said, guys, you guys all know the drill. Zether, out.